Hi, my name is Jen. I'm an engineer at Cardstack, where we're working to make Web 3.0 available to everyone. In this video, I'm going to take you through the quick start for making a card using the Card SDK. A card is kind of like a mini app that can be shared between different parts of a project or shared with other developers so that they can use it too. A card combines data, routing, and visuals to give you something that can be composed to add new functionality to your projects or to bring in things that other people have built. So let's go ahead and get started. First, in order to build a card, you need some of the following installed on your Mac. You're gonna need your basic JavaScript development environment. So really, this video is best for developers who already know a little bit of JavaScript, who've used Git, and who know how to work with packages using Yarn and NPM. So once you have these prerequisites together, especially Docker is another important one, you're going to clone an existing project. Now you might think like, why am I not making a project from scratch? Well, the idea is that cards can live in many different projects. Maybe I'm building a blog and I need a calendar that shows when some upcoming events are. Maybe I'm building a banking website and I need a calendar that shows when someone's next bill is due. Both of those different use cases could rely on the same card, which is a calendar. So in this tutorial, we're going to focus on building a card within another project that already exists, just so you can see a little bit about how those cards can be shared. So to do that, we're going to start by downloading an existing project. So here we have the Cardboard project. This is sort of like a demo that is a good place to look if you're trying to learn how to build a project of your own. And you can clone it using regular git commands. So I already have it here, but if I was going to be adding it to my computer, I would do git clone. I would grab this URL here, and I would do this to create to bring the project onto my own hard drive. All right, so once you have this project, you'll see I've got one here already with all of its files. The next thing to do is to create a new card. So we're going to imagine that we're adding some photos, maybe a photography contest, to this Cardboard app. So I'm going to go into the Cardboard directory here. Every Cardstack project has a name like Cardboard, and inside of that directory is another directory that shares the same name. That the files that are found in there kind of help control the overall application flow and what its dependencies are. So from this point is where we're going to go ahead and create our card. So what's going to happen here is that a card takes quite a few files in the current Card SDK in order to give you ways to style your card, to show what the layout ought to be, and to control the data. And so you don't have to make those files yourself by hand. Our generators here have done it for us. So if we take a look we've got a folder that has all of our cards, and my new card photographer is found here. The next thing we need to do is tell our main app, like, hey, I want to include this card. And the way to do that is we're going to add our new card as a dependency of sort of the main controlling application. So to do that, we're going to go again to our Cardboard directory and add this dependency here. You can see there's already a couple other cards included in this project, so we're just going to add ours here. All right, and then the next step, this is important, is to yarn install. If you haven't already done, even if you've already done this in your project, you need to run it again. And what yarn install is going to do is it'll look through the whole Cardstack project. That's all the cards, all the configurations, and see what dependencies need to be brought in. So what it's doing is creating some links that take our new card and make it available to the rest of the project. So whenever you make a card, cards have their own data. So I'll give you an example here. I'm going to show you our cardboard application in the staging environment. All right. So each of these blog articles here is its own card, and that card comes with its own data, such as the content of the article. And that data takes a particular shape. Maybe it has a title, it has an author, it has the date published, it might have some sort of rich text markup of the article content itself. And there's sort of this question of like, okay, well, how do you say what kind of data should be available on a card? If you can define it, then you can render it reliably inside of many different contexts. So in our example, we're going to actually define what's called a schema. So every card has a schema that says what the kind of data, like what the data looks like that is going to display. So if we go to photographer, this is our photographer card here, static model.js. So this schema that defines the fields that are available on this card, it comes sort of preloaded with some defaults. So whenever you create a card, you'll always get this layout here that says, we're going to create a field called title. So I could do, content.title in order to display the title of a card. But I'm going to replace this with some data from the quick start. So every time we make a photographer card, it's going to have a field called name for our photographer name and a field called biography, which will be a short description of who that person is. Whenever you're developing a card at first, you'll also want to add some seed data. Seed data gives you something to play around with when you're building out your template. So I'm going to add a resource, photographers. I'm going to give it an ID of 1, and I'm going to enter in a photographer's name and biography. Now, one of the things to pay attention to while you're working through these tutorials is whether something is singular or plural. By default, your card name itself is singular, so I have photographer, that's a singular photographer. But whenever we're referring to the type of data, it's going to be here as photographers. So you'll make it plural. So if you're having any trouble with this tutorial, this is a really good place to look to see if you've made any errors here. All right, so we've added our data schema. The next thing we have to figure out is, okay, well, how and where are we going to display this information? We're going to set up a template. And a template is a place where you'll write regular HTML markup, as well as use some template variables in the style of Ember handlebars. And what we're going for here is that we're going to work first on what it looks like when a card is viewed in isolation. We call this the isolated view. And in your app, you'll see files that are called like isolated .hbs, isolated.js, and that's that singular view. If I'm only looking at the card for one photographer, it's that isolated part. But cards also have an embedded view, and the embedded view is where we can see all of these different blog posts together. So I could define totally different styling for what my card looks like when it's grouped together with other cards versus when it's viewed by itself. This is really powerful because it helps guide users through an application, and it also makes your card more reusable to other people. It's sort of like you get to control the preview of what your data looks like. So we're going to start with the isolated view for our card. So we'll grab some of this here, And this is going to go in our card directory, the isolated.hbs file. So I'm going to go to my photographer card, the templates, and isolated. It's got some default content here already. If we had kept that title field, we would be able to see the data there, but I'm going to replace it. So now we have one of our photographer's names and the photographer's biography. The data for a card is always held automatically as content here. And I don't have to do anything special to make content available in this template. It just kind of happens by the way that the Card SDK works. So any fields you've defined in your schema are going to be available on this content object. So I'll save my work here. So now we're at the point where we can actually take a look and see, we can see our card in action. So there's a couple steps here. The first thing I'm going to do is to start the prerequisites. Now, the prerequisites for a project like this have many, there's a whole lot that's going on behind the scenes here, but the summary of it is that the prerequisites are setting up a Postgres database as well as some API endpoints that serve our data. So the prerequisites are basically handling the backend, some of the pieces needed for the backend communications. That's exciting to me because I really want to focus my efforts on how to present the data and help users navigate through the site and not so much about setting up the Postgres database. Now that's just the default configuration. When you're building a card, it can be backed by all different types of data sources. It could be backed by a repository that's hosted on GitHub. It could be backed by something on the blockchain. It could be backed by data that's coming in from another API altogether, like maybe some enterprise CMS. Those are all options, but we're just sticking to the basics and the defaults for this tutorial here. All right, so we started our prerequisites. The next thing we're going to do is start up the hub. And the Cardstack hub is what's responsible for sort of bringing all of this data and all of these cards together in one place. And as the hub is starting up, if you've wired everything up correctly, you should actually see your card right here. So we can see that our photographer card is loading and that we've defined some things in that static models.js file, and those are going to be available too. So this is a good sign. All right, the next thing we're going to do is actually start up the front-end application that will display our cards and give us an environment to work with. So I'm going to do this in a new tab over here. And we'll get this going. So you'll notice in this command, it's yarn start Ember. Ember is a front-end framework that Cardstack uses in order to help with some of the rendering things. So you don't need to learn Ember in order to build a Cardstack card, but they're running behind the scenes. All right, so while we're waiting for that to load, I can talk a little bit about what you should expect to see when you visit your local server. Actually, it looks like it is done. Let's have a look here. All right. So as I mentioned, we're working in the Cardboard application, which is our demo app. And this is good so far. So we're looking at the Cardboard articles and blog posts and things. So we know that our app overall is working. It matches what we saw earlier that was up on the demo, the live demo site. So that's good. I'm going to go see if I can find our photographers data. So I'm going to go to photographers/1. And you can't see it yet because we need to add some styling, but there's our data that came from the schema that we made. So let's add a little bit of styling so that we can actually read this against this dark background here. One of the places to do that is in your individual cards style sheets. So if I go to isolated, again, because we're looking at just one card, a single photographer. If I go to isolated, I could add some styles like I'm going to do background color. We'll do white, and we'll say radius 5 pixels. We'll give it some padding, and I'm going to add a top margin. And then I'll save. And one of the pretty cool things is that we don't have to restart our app. It automatically picks up that we've made some changes to this card and it's displayed them. Now, one thing to remember when you're working through this tutorial is if you're making changes to kind of like the guts of the card. So I'm talking about you make a change to the schema, you want to add some more seed data, you'll need to go back and stop those prereqs with yarn stop prereqs and restart again in order to load that new schema definition. But if you're just making changes like I'm going to add some buttons and I want to add some JavaScript functionality so something happens when I click that button, you want to add styles, those things are going to load automatically. So in terms of next steps, you've made it through the end of the quick start part of the tutorial. We've got a whole bunch of more content that's about adding some of the more advanced features. Right now, this is just a little tiny toy example, and we haven't really unlocked yet in our example what Cardstack can really do. If you want to get an idea of it, looking at the Cardboard demo app is a great place. You can create relationships between data. You can have your app pull in data from many different sources. You can add special search capability. You can add caching so that if you're talking to a really slow API, your app itself isn't slow because it's already prefetched and cached some of that data. All of those things are all present in the Cardstack environment, and they're tools that are available for you to use. So you can continue reading and going through these guides to find out more about how to implement those features. And again, I think one of the best ways to learn is really to look at some of the example applications and how they're put together. Because that's really where the magic happens, is bringing in all these different features into one place, finding out how they fit is really kind of the part that I think is most exciting about the Card SDK. So that's it for our tutorial today. Thank you for listening and good luck.